Hi. So today I thought I'd tell you about a little concept in history that I think is pretty well known, but just in case some people may not know what it is, I thought I'd tell you about it. And that is, of course, primogeniture. Now, what is primogeniture? Because you hear primogeniture, like the word, and you may be a bit confused about what it means. What it really means is passing on the properties. Like it's more present in like history. It's still present today in some parts of the world, but it's passing on the properties to the eldest son. And I do mean son, not eldest child. Say if the eldest child was a girl, it would go on to the man. And then in the case that none of the children were girls, then the children of the girls. And if there were no children and no grandchildren, then probably would go on to the eldest child. But if you could find a male heir, that would be the one to get the thing, whatever it is. So this concept of primogeniture is really important in terms of medieval, modern history, especially in Europe, but definitely all around the world. Um, so, for example, let's just take the most obvious case, and a king. Let's take, for example, okay, a great example of primogeniture is Henry VIII. But let's just take Henry VII, for that matter. Henry VII, he had a couple of children. He had Arthur, he had Henry, he had Mary, he had a bunch. The eldest child was Arthur, and he was the de facto Prince of Wales, the heir. But he was male, so there was no problem there. Then the next child was Henry, I think, and then Mary was there in between. But I don't know the exact order. Now let's just say, for argument's sake, there was. I mean, this may be the case. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know the exact family tree, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that there was a female child between Arthur and Henry. I don't think there was, but just in case, let's just put it there. Arthur died in 1502. Now, the problem is, when Arthur died, if we're talking about today's society, the throne would go on, like, the heir presumptive, the heir, what's the word? The heir presumptive would go on to the next child. If that were a woman, nowadays it would go to a woman, especially in Britain after 2013, that was changed. But I'm talking about 1502 England, so primogeniture was still in place, meaning that the next male person in line was Henry, Prince Henry. Now feature Henry VIII. And yeah, then you have Henry VIII, which is an amazing example of how primogeniture really works. So we have Henry VIII, who married Catherine of Aragon. Primogeniture only works with illegitimate heirs. If we're talking about an illegitimate heir, a bastard, that does not work. So you can't just go, if you're a king, you can't just go around having sex with random women and hoping for a male heir. You need a wife for that. You need a legitimate heir. So Henry had different children and had a bunch with Catherine of Aragon, but the only one to survive to adulthood was Mary. Problem is, the eldest child was a female, and Henry needed a son. Otherwise, it would go on to other members of his family, and he didn't want that. So that was one of the reasons why he divorced Catherine of Aragon and married Anne Boleyn. He tried having children with Anne Boleyn, and the only person he had was Elizabeth. Again, another female. So if Henry were to die there and then, the throne would go on to Mary. But because Mary was legitimized, the throne would go on to Elizabeth. But still, primogeniture has not come into place just yet because there are no male heirs, and so far Mary or Elizabeth have not had any children. Then with Jane Seymour, Henry does have a son, Edward, meaning that Edward immediately skips to the front of the line and becomes the next heir of England, and of course the future King of England. Henry, I don't know if he has more children after Edward, but definitely no legitimate ones. The only legitimate children Henry had were Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Now, Edward, he was quite young when he died. I think it was around the age of 16, and he didn't have any children, meaning that the throne can go on to his offspring because he just didn't have any. So it'd go on to the next in line, meaning, I know I've said meaning a lot, but it would go on to one of his sisters or their male sons. Problem is, none of his sisters had a male son by then, so it would have to go on to the eldest legitimate child. By this point, both Elizabeth and Mary had been made legitimate again, thanks to Catherine Parr, sorry. I know I said Catherine Howard. But Catherine Parr had managed to convince Henry to legitimize both Mary and Elizabeth after they had been illegitimized because of the birth of Edward. So Mary was not queen. The pressure was on to Mary because she needed to have a son, but she failed to do so. So when she died, the throne would go on to Elizabeth. Well, technically she should go to Elizabeth's sons, but seeing as she didn't have any, it would go on to Elizabeth. And Elizabeth did not have any children, so it would go on to the next available heir, which was James, the Sixth of Scotland, first of England. That is an excellent example of how primogeniture works. It goes to the male heir, and if there's no legitimate male heir, it has to go to a woman. At the time, it's like the last option, really, not desired option. Just like Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, she was the granddaughter of James IV of Scotland. He had just one child, I think he had just one child. But his eldest child was James. And when he died at the Battle of the Spurs, I think it was, it's around that time, the throne would go on to James V. And James V, if I'm not mistaken, had just one child, Mary. And he died when Mary was just 6 days old, meaning she didn't have any children. So the throne had to go on to Mary. The throne of Scotland, I mean. Mary took the throne, and when she had a child, James, was quite clearly the male heir. And yeah. So primogeniture, like you've seen, it just means that it goes on to the eldest male in the family. Direct male heir. Not just a random male. If there are no direct children, if all the children are exhausted, for example, let's just take the case of Henry VIII, because it's the best scenario to explain primogeniture. All the children have been exhausted. They've all had, and they all ruled, and none of them have had children. So you need to go to the next available male. That is, if you look at the family tree, that is James. Because Henry VII's daughter Mary had married James IV of Scotland, which meant that Mary, Queen of Scots, was the granddaughter of Henry VII. So they had quite a direct line to the throne. And it would just go on to the nearest male heir in that line. And if that line was exhausted, you go on to the next line, and so on and so forth. That's in terms of monarchical succession. I'm sure there are other instances of primogeniture, but that is the main one you need to know. and monarchical terms. There's also like other situations in terms of property, but in terms of history, studying history, it's definitely like monarchs. This is the case for like Spain right now. Our king has at least an older sister, like an older sister, but because of primogeniture, Philip, the sixth of Spain, is now king, even though he has an older sister. Right now, the king only has two daughters, and unless he has a son, which is not looking like it's gonna happen, Leonor, she would be the next queen of Spain. In England, however, Charles is the heir to the throne, and his eldest child is William, and his eldest child is George. Let's just say that William had an eldest daughter. In 2013, the law was changed because, Kate was pregnant with George, and they didn't know if George was a girl or a boy, so they decided to convince the queen to change the laws so that if whatever child they would have would become king or queen, just like gender put aside. Because it's quite obvious that George will become king of England. Unless there's a revolution of sorts, or the monarchy is abolished or whatever, George is in the throne. Charles was you've seen the video. If you haven't, go check it out. But the line of succession goes Elizabeth, who's the current queen, then Charles, then William, and then George. And that's the direct line, so that all of them will, in theory, go on to the throne. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there because that's pretty much all you need to know about primogeniture. It's kind of a simple concept, but some people get confused, and I thought I'd just give a quick review of what primogeniture is. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it interesting, and yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.